In the last episode, I showed you guys my project, described the gameplay, and went over some steps of how I polished my game to make it look and feel better. Since I wanted to do enemies this week, I asked you what types I should add and got a comment saying I could add ones that can dodge player bullets, approach them from different sides, and have some sort of resistance and vulnerability to different elements. I also added some goals of my own. For example, I wanted each enemy to feel unique and have its role in the game, and not just be a copy of another one, but stronger. And I also wanted to make a unique silhouette for each enemy that will make them easily recognizable and will communicate their attack and behavior clearly. But before I started working on the designs, I needed to make a system that will allow me to effortlessly make new enemies and also let me quickly iterate on existing ones. Since I needed that system to make the first enemy and rework my old ones, I started first with that. I made a simple behavior tree with two tasks. A move to one and an attack one. Enemies will have their repositioning abilities executed with the move to task and their attack abilities with, well, the attack one. The behavior tree also takes into account for stuns and is simple and flexible enough that I can literally copy and paste it for each new enemy and only have to make slight adjustments. Now that we have that in mind, let's get on with the first enemy that I made. The slime. The slime leaves a toxic trail behind himself and constantly follows the player. The trail deals damage over time while we're in it, and the slime doesn't stop producing it. So by letting him live, you risk having most of your map covered with his, well, slime. His design really added to the game as it covered all the needed aspects. It had unique behavior, it's easily counterable by wind abilities as they knock him away, and also has a different silhouette that can be recognized with ease. To make his asset, I used this pixel dudes maker on itch.io and added some elements to make him more threatening and detailed by giving him red eyes and dark green color. For the trail, I just drew a green shape and rotated it on every spawn to make it seem like it's spilled on the ground. The second enemy that I made is the Bomber. I wanted to have an enemy like this ever since I started working on this game. I loved his version in Hades and made mine as close as possible by making him walk to a location and throw two bombs that would land around the player's area. The bombs also communicate the location pretty clearly by signaling where they will fall with this big red circle that I made. I really like how this enemy turned out, as it applies just the right amount of pressure without being annoying or just feeling unfair. It makes you move around to evade and also is very open to be attacked and isn't dangerous by himself. At the start I thought he was quite easy to deal with, but then I spawned 10 of him and my opinion quickly changed. For his visual, I once again used the Pixel Dudes Maker as a base to draw the skeleton with a big bomb on his back, making him a less edgier version compared to his inspiration. The third enemy that I made is the Slasher. It's a tanky enemy that charges to the player's location, dealing damage on impact. Its role is similar to the Bomber, but in a slightly different way. It shows where it's going to attack, but can be evaded way easily since you don't really need to dash, you can just walk away from his path and he will completely miss. He compensates by dealing a lot of damage and having a big windup, so I think it all matches up pretty well at the end of the day. The Slasher also suffers from the same case as the Bomber, where a single one of him isn't threatening at all, but a 10 is like a whole another story. It's important to mention that the charge of the Slasher cannot be cancelled by any knockbacks, as he enters an unstoppable mode when starting the attack, denying any crowd control whatsoever. As for the visual, I figured this one should be a goat. It really fits its behavior, and I didn't have a four-legged creature, so it was a perfect match at the end of the day. Now at this point, I felt like my small shooter just wasn't enough when it comes to applying pressure with projectiles. I wanted to add more versatile ones with different effects, so I made this big shooter guy that shoots wide, slow projectiles that deal heavy damage, kind of like a better version of the weak shooter. I also made this stationary turret type enemy that shoots 3 quick projectiles that slow the player on impact. Both of these added quite a bit to the variety of projectiles sent your way, making the battlefield feel busier and more interesting. Suddenly I had more reasons to look at my character rather than the enemies during combat, as one mistake could cost me my whole life, which I'm completely fine with having in my game. Dark Guy's asset was literally me trying to make a ghost, but I failed completely and just settled with what seems to be a very weird alien, but I really like how it turned out, so I'll just keep it for now. He's also pretty big, which communicates his attacking scale pretty well. The stationary shooter one I originally made to be a turret, but that made absolutely no sense in the game's context, like it was literally a futuristic turret. The final model turned out to be a plant. I felt like it kind of fit in, being stationary and unmovable, so I'm just gonna go with that one. Now, Enough with these complex systems and deep, long behavior trees. I wanted to make a simple, annoying enemy that can be killed in one hit. So I went ahead and made these flying EyeBats that chase you around and deal damage when they get really close. Their role was to be a swarm enemy that isn't a big threat, but more of a distraction. Since they weren't much of a swarm on their own, I made a spawner enemy that will be spawning them occasionally, so if you're tired of them coming for you, you can just go and focus on their quote-unquote mother to prevent them from spawning further. For their model, I made this classic flying EyeBat with their mom being a big eye, that in hindsight I could have probably colored better, but it's a bit too late now. The last enemy I made is a shield and spear one. I didn't manage to make an asset for him on time, so for the sake of this showcase I'll just use this placeholder dino that I got online. This enemy blocks every basic attack from the player, forcing you to use your abilities on him. He will occasionally throw a spear towards you to make you keep your distance, but in general he's easier to deal with than he seems. His idea came after I observed my friends playing the game and noticed that most of them heavily rely on using their basic attacks during their runs. Now, I'm not against this approach at all, but this should spice things up by forcing you to use your other spells as well. And that's it for the enemies that I made this past week. You may wonder what happened to the big melee dude from the last video. I wanted to do something special for him, like a big AoE attack, but the animation work was harder than I thought, so I couldn't make him in time for this video. The running cycles for those enemies is already pushing my limits of pixel art, so he'll take a bit longer, but I haven't forgotten about him. As a final touch, I added an exclamation mark on top of the enemies as a way for them to signal their attacks. That feature single-handedly made my combat way more organized, as it artificially showed the player which enemies to watch out for and which ones to focus. I can't stress enough how good of an addition that was, so I hope you guys like this as well. All the enemies are of course still full of bugs and I still need to clean them up, but having this big variety in the game from early on really showed me the true potential of the final thing. Every enemy feels like it has a role in the combat, and even though they don't have any complex AI manager to control their attacks and intensity of combat, they still fit together very nicely, and I'm pretty happy with them. To wrap things up, I made a simple game loop where after beating 10 stages or just simply dying in between, the players will be faced with an end screen, highlighting your performance and stats. I wanted to give them something they can screenshot and show at the end of a run, that will showcase their experience as well as their performance. I copied the point system from Risk of Rain 2 to add a final score to the game, which should show how efficient your run was. For later stages, I plan on adding a leaderboard that will let you compare your best score to every other player's. I think that's going to be a good incentive to keep playing and improving your playstyle, or even better, trying a new one. And that's basically it for now. I really want to know what you guys think of the new enemy roster. Let me know which enemies you like the most or least and why. Bonus points if you give me name suggestions for them as well, since I've always struggled with things like that. Their names will be of course displayed if they kill you at the end screen, so try being creative with them. For the next vlog I want to focus on abilities a bit more, since I still haven't finished that full ability roster. My plan is to have 4 abilities of each element, aside from the basic attack of course, that complement each other and offer different approaches when it comes to combat. Some of my current ones still don't do that, so there's a lot to be desired there. As always, if you want to follow me further on this development, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.